Hi, my name is Phil Metzger, and in 1992 I moved to Moscow, Russia. From there I lived in the beautiful Central European country of Hungary, where my family and I spent the next 20 years living, learning, and sharing about Jesus. Different foods, culture, and language, but underneath it all, we discovered the most amazing people. We learned that to share the gospel effectively, we had to adjust. We had to cross cultures. Now we're back in the U.S., and we're discovering that this country is a melting pot of culture. This show is committed to helping Christians connect to those who think, believe, and live differently than them. This is Crossing Cultures. Well, welcome to this episode of Crossing Cultures, where we are learning as Christians how we can connect to people who might live, believe, think differently than we do. And in this episode, I'm going to take the lead a little bit more. We're going to talk about, these are some big words, and we're going to expand them today. Ready? Ethnocentrism, strangeness, and power dynamics. And I want to spell all of these out. As a doctoral student of intercultural studies, my passion previously and still to this day has been to help people learn how to bridge gaps between cultural differences so that we can connect to each other and ultimately so that we can know who Jesus is. He crossed the ultimate cultural barrier. He came from heaven to earth, lived among us, did all this so that we could know him and that we could be born again. And as always, I'm joined by my buddy, Nick Roach.
Hello, Philip.
Nick, thanks for being here. These are topics that I've spent a lot of time pouring over. Mm-hmm. And then into all, in doing these things and mainly focused on intercultural. My passion's been the overseas, missionary or the person who's trying to connect to somebody who doesn't speak the same language, person who doesn't share the same foods, person whose history is so different than mine. How do I bridge gaps to connect to them? And it's interesting that when you do that, the beginning is truly like a honeymoon. They're like, oh, wow, I'm so glad to get to know an American, or, oh, I'm so glad to get to know somebody from Guatemala or from, Ethiopia, or in my case, it was Hungary or Ukraine or Russia. And but then it wears off. The honeymoon ends. Honeymoon ends because you're like, okay, now I can't, I'm trying to say something important and they don't understand me. Then I've learned words and they're still not understanding me, And it just keeps going. And so it's become one of my big passions. One of my favorite books on the subject is a book called Diversity Competence. I have props today.
Nice.
I have props,
Good.
Yeah.
We're learning today.
We're learning, yeah. No puppets, but I do have props. Okay, this book is called Diversity Competence. And the reason I'm even showing it, one, it's a great book, really, really well written. But I love its subtitle. The subtitle is this: Cultures Don't Meet, People Do. Because I think we can get caught up in the whole kind of notion of cross culture, crossing cultures. This is our big thing. It's not about that in the end. It's about how we can bridge that cultural gap so that I can connect to a human being.
That's good.
That's our goal, right? And we're watching our country here in the United States, and I hope that we're going to have an audience far beyond the U.S. But for those who are, or those that have been paying attention to what's happening in the United States, we've been seeing, we are in this pandemic. We're still in this pandemic of coronavirus. And the way I've tried to describe it is the world, we went into lockdown in the pandemic, and then the racial tensions that occurred, we blew up. It's like the world blew up, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery. Now we've got Jacob Blake, just happening.
That was down the street.
That's really?
Yeah, it was 30 minutes probably from my house.
Are you kidding? In Kenosha?
Yep.
I didn't know that's where, I knew you were from the area.
Yeah, it's really close.
It's just heartbreaking, and it's like immediately these things happen. Something happens. One, sadly, we know it's going to happen. This is insanity, but it is. And then immediately we break into two groups. There's the group that's like, he shouldn't have resisted arrest, and, and there's these things. And then there's another group that's like right away, how could this be happening? This is injustice. And it's like, and depending on, when I say that, some of you are like, oh, that's a good point. And the other is like, no, it's not. That's a stupid point.
Right.
And our goal isn't to we're not going to solve all these cultural problems,
right.
But we are just acknowledging that they exist, and that as Christians who believe, we really believe that Jesus is the answer, and that we're not going to solve racial tension in America.
Yeah. I think it's important too to highlight, Phil, that one of the coolest things I learned from a psychologist a couple of years ago was we're talking about how to we're talking about conflict resolution, and I'm sure probably you guys study this as pastors and counselors, but like when people are having conflict, and you can even think about this as people, but in our case, we're talking about people groups where if there's a conflict that comes up, I have my experience of that, and you have your experience of that. If we have an argument, I have my side of what you did to me and what I did, and you have your version. So the goal is not for me to absorb your reality or yours mine. It's for us to create a mutual reality of the experience that's productive for the future of a relationship.
Exactly. It's like a third culture that we create together.
But I feel like the sides are being formed because people are trying to say that, no, what I experienced is the whole truth.
Right.
And it's just, it can never be that way in a relationship.
Never.
We have to agree on.
And what you just did there was set me up for definitions.
Oh, wonderful.
No joke. Seriously.
Great.
It's almost like, and we didn't plan that, and it actually happened.
Perfect.
Because what you just described is what our first definition is going to be: ethnocentrism. Big word.
I never heard that word before.
Never heard that word, yeah. It's definitely one that we use in like intercultural studies or cross-culture. It's the word and I have props.
Great.
I told you guys that, right?
Even better. I learned this better now.
Look at this. You can see this now. You can see the word ethnocentrism right here. And if you're listening, probably most of the people are listening, I'm going to read this definition. You ready? Here it is. The definition of ethnocentrism: it's the tendency to consider one's own views and customs and values as normal, self-evident, and often superior to those of others. So what you just described is an ethnocentric approach. It's that I see my background, my story as the norm. And I don't think anybody can not do that. We all do that. And so ethnocentrism is not a negative thing. I mean, it's a neutral topic because I only know what I know. I bring what I know, what I have, what I've experienced. I grew up in my home. You grew up in your home. You grew up, where you grew up. I grew up where I grew up. And then we meet, and I filter everything through my norms. And so then, we'll unpack it a little bit more, but this is the idea, okay? And but let me move on to the next definition with my third prop for the day. It's called strangeness. You ready? Here it is. Strangeness. The experience we have when someone from another group acts or responds in a way that is somehow unknown, unexpected, or quote unquote strange. So strangeness happens when I'm not recognizing that my ethnocentrism, my view of myself as the norm, when I'm not paying attention to that, and I have an experience from somebody from a different cultural background, and it doesn't process in my brain, this is called the strangeness effect. And that's when I start to go, well, I've never eaten those foods. I've never heard it said like that. This is strange. And I love that there's an actual effect. It really helped me because you hear it all the time. And again, we'll talk more about it, but you hear this all the time. You see it now. And my hope is that everybody listening or watching after this, you're going to start, on the TikTok videos or YouTube videos or Instagram videos. You watch these videos that are out there and you watch the conflicts that are existing between two cultural perspectives and you hear it all the time. And so, anyways.
That's good. I think too, just before your last thing is this, it makes me think of this idea our experiences are true but incomplete.
Yeah.
So we can't have a group experience or community experience that really reflects what's actually happening if only one person's point of view is the point of view.
Right.
We all have to agree that, hey, your experience in this system has to be validated.
Exactly.
For us to do anything positive, productive with it.
And there's so much invalidating of people's experiences happening that it doesn't produce relationship. Right. And again, that's really ultimately the point. The whole point that we have is that it's not about that I have to agree. And that's something that I'm gonna unpack this a lot in coming episodes as well. I don't have to agree with someone to build a bridge with them. Right. We have got to learn how to be able to have disagreements. It's not just disagreeing agreeably. That's nice and it's sweet. But I mean, genuinely for me to have a respect for a human being who thinks, lives, and believes totally different than me, and that I can respect them as a person made in the image of God, and because they're made in the image of God, they have value, and that value has nothing to do with how they're living, thinking, or believing.
Right.
It's just the very
Yeah,
fact
that's
that
good.
they exist. And then on top of that, I want to grow. I want to grow. I have an incomplete knowledge, like you said. I have my experiences. Listen, I spent a lifetime learning people, learning myself, and learning about God. And it's incomplete. It's just incomplete.
Yeah.
So we never should get to that point where we are like, oh, I've learned it all.
Right, I'm good.
I'm good, exactly. So, okay, this is to my third final definition, and this is the most controversial one of them all.
Okay.
This is in cross-culturalism, we call this power dynamics.
Okay.
Power dynamics. Here's the definition. Power dynamics. It is what did I write? The ability to influence situations or people. Now, again, that's not like a working definition of all power.
Sure,
it's
sure.
just for cross-cultural issues, the ability to influence situations or people. Now, this expresses itself primarily in like people groups. So you have a people group that is larger. We see this in tribal context all across Africa. You know, when the European colonies gave up their rights over Africa, they basically drew lines, you know, kind of arbitrarily, like, okay, this is now Nigeria, this is now Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, this is now, you know. And what you ended up with is people groups within those new lines that were enemies. And so you'd have a majority over a minority, and so you had a power dynamic.
Gotcha.
We have a power dynamic in America. And so that's why, and where's the controversy? Because the controversy is the way that we describe power dynamics today is the word privilege.
You're going to have to help us understand that one.
We're going to have to unpack this one. We will have to do this together.
I know in terms of cultural dynamics, or excuse me, what is it? Cultural
Dynamics.
What is a good, helpful way to think about privilege?
Yeah. I'm going to actually read a definition that I think did a very good job. And this is a definition that is used that had, you know, it's not American centered. In fact, it comes from my book, Diversity Competence, written by two Dutch guys. Yeah. And so their context is far outside of just, you know, America. And again, this podcast, we don't want to be ethnocentric. We're not only thinking about America, we're thinking about people. So here's a definition, okay? Privilege means that society and its institutions are structured to more or less fit your needs. It means that acceptable social codes coincide with your habits, lifestyle, and that institutions use methods that are geared towards your preferences. So here's some examples they give. You get time off on days when your traditional holidays are celebrated. Your taste in formal clothing is probably exactly right for a job interview. And the history classes in school cover the actions of your ancestors, and they probably do it in a favorable way. That's how they defined privilege.
Right. It's hard to argue with it, but it is like.
But yet people are like.
If that's the first time you hear it, it would be hard.
Yeah.
To take that at face value.
I think so.
You know, I could imagine a legit struggle. A mental struggle of like, really?
Yeah, like that'd
be hard.
Well, and I think we're running into this problem, and we could talk about privilege here for a minute. Power dynamic. We're running into the issue where there's almost this like idea that people have that like, you know, and we've talked about white privilege, and this might be an episode before that. So if we haven't shown it, it's coming. Okay, privilege is the precursor or kind of before the idea of white privilege, because not every country is dealing with a color issue.
Right.
There's privilege. You know, Nigeria has privilege issues, and everyone's black.
Right.
So it's not a color thing there. Obviously, here in America, this is the issue. So I guess I'm trying to like broaden our understanding that we see it from the bigger picture, because right now when somebody says privilege, it's a massive trigger word.
Yeah, right.
It's massive. It hurts people. And it's making white people go, that's not fair. I've worked hard. I'm poor. I came from a hard life. You know, and we talk about that in other episodes. You know, I've had a hard life. And I guess that doesn't invalidate that. The idea of privilege here is not that you personally have never struggled.
Right, exactly.
It's that you might be a part of a people group that are a majority. That's not your fault.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Nobody did anything wrong.
Or that you just may have something, in all the struggles that you have had, you just may have something that has not contributed to that.
Exactly.
To those issues for you, you know.
I mean, can I ask? I'm going to ask
Yeah.
a question, and we didn't talk about it, but I was just thinking about it. I'm thinking about your football, and I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
I was joking earlier, like we haven't even talked about the fact. But I'm thinking back to your college days. I don't know how, as you can tell, I didn't play football.
Oh,
I know, it's shocking. I know.
Weird.
Like, so you were at Northwestern?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Were football players privileged on that campus?
Yes. And I think, honestly...
And I don't know. I'm not asking because
I
I'm
think
not
yes,
leading the
for
question.
Sure. But I think in the college sports world, the football players are the privileged
Kind of
group.
privileged.
Yeah,
Right?
right.
It's how
Because,
it seems
yeah,
from the outside.
The other teams, they use like our weight room. We have our own weight room.
Right.
And then the other sports use the football weight room or the
Right.
football field. The girl sports practice on the football field when we don't need it. Like everybody else works around
your schedule,
the football
like
team.
it's our field
Yeah,
that they rent. It's
Right.
our weight room. It's our, scholarships, right? There's probably more scholarships go to
more
the football
scholarships,
players.
more full scholarships. Back when I was going to school, there were 85 full scholarships
Wow.
for each football team. But basketball, I don't know how many basketball. Some teams may have half that, or
Right.
some sports where there were no full scholarships.
But then let me. I mean, I could say that, and then you could be like, yeah, but we bring the money in,
right, yeah, exactly.
right? I mean,
Mhm.
there's so privilege comes with like a responsibility in that sense, right? And the reason I wanted to point that out was to just say like every little ecosystem has points of privilege.
Correct, yeah.
Like it's
And like
moving.
you said, it's not inherently a bad thing or
No.
a good thing. It's just how it is.
Because how many? I mean, we could carry that same story of football and just say how many young men got opportunities to go to college that would have never ever had that opportunity. I'm sure it's quite a few.
Oh yeah, I mean, even myself thinking about going to Northwestern. My mom raised us. I think that one time I looked up the median income in the neighborhood I grew up in, and it was like $24,000 with a average household occupancy of like 5 or 6 people.
Oh my goodness.
So going to a school that even at that time was $45,000, almost $50,000 a year, for me was like, are you serious?
You wouldn't have even ever thought
Yeah,
about it.
It was never even a thought. So having that opportunity, that privilege, was something I'm super thankful for.
Being good at something gave you an advantage. Yeah, and that's the way. That's life.
That's how it works. Mm-hmm.
So I guess pointing that out is just to simply say like, people get really defensive quickly on the idea of privilege
Sure.
when it's a concept that is being taught in interculturalism all the time, and it's meant to be neutral at first. In other words, it's possible to be a part of a privileged group and be using that for great advantage.
I'm so glad you said that too, because this is one thing that we try to talk to our kids about from as early as we can. In Scripture it says that we're part of a royal priesthood.
Yes.
And so we try to get them comfortable. It even sounds weird to us, but we try to get them comfortable with this idea that they are princes and princesses, because royalty in God's eyes is an exceptional opportunity, because you get to use your power
Right.
to serve the people around you.
That's right.
It's not about using your power so that you never have to experience certain things, or
Right.
it's really this trusted responsibility.
Exactly.
That's an exciting opportunity. So just having the right relationship with privilege and power, I think, turns from being this thing that is self-preservative and can be oppressive to something that can be an amazing gift
Right.
to every single person.
And
in
if I'm
that
a
system.
Christian and I'm filled with the Holy Spirit, then I have God helping me direct the way that I utilize either my privilege, one, or my lack of it,
Yeah,
and
right.
how I see people and how I treat others. And I love that. We need to teach our kids how to see themselves as royalty now. And then
In
to
the true
not
sense, yeah.
exactly. And I love that, because there's too many people that are just like, the whole goal is to get to the top so you can hold the top. But what if in God's kingdom, the whole goal is to, top is down.
Yeah.
And if you want to be great in God's kingdom, learn to be the servant of all. Right. So reaching the top means I'm now serving people. I'm loving people, whoever that is. So the privileged position in God's kingdom is to be at the bottom.
Right.
So
Yeah, it's backwards.
so backwards. So backwards.
Yeah. Well, so then, since we've been going through all the definitions, then
Yeah.
help me understand, like, where do we start with all this? Like, unpack.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to start with ethnocentrism.
Yeah,
or
let's start
whatever,
there. Yeah, it's a big word. I had an eyelash there. It's kind of a big word. Okay, I want to suggest something, and people are gonna some people will like it, some people will not like it. It's just a concept, like a working concept for people to consider. Because I think when we talk about ethnocentrism, remember, that's the very idea that my norms, my cultural norms, my food, my language, my experiences is the norm. And it can lead me to even seeing myself as superior to somebody else, okay? And we'll unpack that a little bit. But we've been throwing around the term racist and racism a lot. Not we as in you and me, but it's out there today.
Yeah, right.
You're either against racism or you're a racist. And this is kind of a lot of dividing lines. And so I want to unpack ethnocentrism like this. Ethnocentrism is a precursor to racism. It could be, that's a lot.
Say that again, please.
Yeah. Exactly. Ethnocentrism is a precursor to racism. In other words, I'm running with this idea. Are we all racists?
No.
Are we all born racist? We're all born sinners, the Bible says. Are we all born racist? I do believe that we teach racism. I think it's taught, and it's also caught, by what we see. But ethnocentrism as a precursor to racism, let me say it like this. Every racist is ethnocentric.
Okay.
I'm not sure that every person who is ethnocentric is already now a racist.
Sure.
You see it in little kids where a white kid that is 2 years old that has never seen a black person before and they see them. Maybe they're afraid and we can say the parents haven't taught them well. It's just something different. That's a part of the strangeness effect. You look different than anything I've ever seen in my little existence. And now how we teach the kid at that point changes everything.
Right, yeah.
Do I teach them to no, we're not afraid of a person because of their color. We love people because they're made in God's image. Or, on the other hand, am I going to be like, oh, there's no color? And we've talked about color blindness. Sorry, we've talked about that. We want to teach our kids, look at that. That's beautiful. That's a person made in God's image. So ethnocentrism is when I see my culture as the norm or as superior. So let me I want to unpack it. And I wrote a few thoughts down on this. Living overseas, I got the opportunity to experience it personally. What it was like to try to go into a new culture, to several cultures, and I'm thinking I'm there to bring the greatest message of all time, the gospel. This should be easy. Just open your Bible and read it to people. They don't speak English. They don't communicate the way that we communicate here.
With the words, with the right words.
With the right words, the tone of the words. You don't just walk up to somebody and have a conversation. It doesn't work like that. I'll give you an example. All across Eastern Europe, and I only mention it just to say, just to make obvious, contrasts here. In America, we walk down the street or we go to the park. We both like to walk that one park, and you walk by somebody, and you usually smile at them and you'll say hi. It's just it's just what we do. You would never do that in Eastern Europe because you don't know that person.
Just don't look at them.
You might look at them just to acknowledge that they're there, but you would never smile. You would never smile, and you would never say, hi.
Wow.
You're a weirdo. You're just a weirdo.
That's awesome.
And there's reasons for that. There's cultural issues that have created that dynamic, and that's not wrong. And I remember, me and my wife Joy. She's like she is joy. She brings joy all the time. She's like, I'm gonna change that. I'm gonna do, and it never worked. It just never worked. It never worked. And so we all have these things, right? So you imagine an American going into Europe, and let's say you're on vacation, and you go into a restaurant that's a local restaurant, and you're gonna try their foods, right? And then you eat something, you're like, that's gross. Or, okay, that's the negative. Here's the neutral. That's weird. What is it weird based on?
Right, yeah.
It's weird based on the fact that it's not meatloaf or
my
experiences.
Yeah, that's good.
So ethnocentrism is when I use and we all do it. It's not a bad thing, but it is, if gone unchecked, it becomes... The fruit of that, unchecked, can become racism.
That's good.
And the jump is very quick. I think the jump is very quick. We talk about how, let me give another example. We go to another country, and it's funny because, and there's nothing wrong with this. I would say all of us, all Americans, we are a part of a privileged group because the world is learning English. Because they know... It's those Americans that are going to go on vacation, pre and hopefully post-pandemic.
Yeah.
We go on vacation, and so you go into a restaurant. I can't tell you how many times I would hear somebody say to me, "How come this menu isn't in English?" Because you're not in an English-speaking country, and
good.
yet they're going to do that for you because you're privileged.
Right. That's a good point too. Actually, yesterday I was looking up. I'm learning Spanish guitar right now.
Yeah.
So I'm looking up these videos.
We're going to have a whole podcast on you playing the.
And I thought of you though because there was this lady, you could tell she had a really thick accent. But so she's playing Spanish guitar, and then I find out after a couple videos that she's Hungarian.
Oh, no way.
This Hungarian lady playing Spanish guitar, but she's making a video in English. You know what I'm saying? And I'm like, but she has to because, or not she has to, but she feels the need to, I'm assuming, because she realizes if enough Americans or enough English-speaking people enjoy it, that's her biggest.
I mean, the market
is huger. So
it's
that's
a
interesting
reality
to think about, yeah.
Yeah. I knew some kids in Hungary who big into Call of Duty. They're just like Call of Duty fanatics, and they had a huge following in Hungary. They would do those tutorial videos or here's what to do. I don't know. That's out of my I'm just glad I could remember the name Call of Duty. But they realized, man, if we really want to get this, we got to do it in English. So we do live in a world where, as an American and as British people and as countries, English-speaking countries, Australia, New Zealand, we live in a part of a linguistic privilege.
Right.
Okay, it's not white privilege;
Yeah,
it's
good.
linguistic privilege, because people cater to my English.
And so if we're not careful, Spanish or Hungarian or anything else could become a quote-unquote weird language,
I hear it, and
strange
I'm like,
language.
What's wrong? And I want to give an example of strangeness. Can I talk about that now?
Yeah,
I think,
please.
Because I think strangeness is what happens when we don't check our ethnocentrism.
Okay.
So I just let it go. I'm not aware of it. I'm not paying attention. And then strangeness happens because I begin to see things as strange. But strange can sound neutral. It's the idea of like fear and the idea of like
it shouldn't be that way.
Yeah, it shouldn't be that way. So I'll give an example. I was with a group of Hungarians who were here in America, and we were touring around speaking at different churches, and most of them don't speak any English. And there was a guy that we were interacting with who obviously didn't speak Hungarian.
Yeah.
And one of the gals was speaking to me in Hungarian, and she was just saying, "Hey, can I move these tables to get ready for this, event?" Harmless conversation. The guy didn't understand, obviously. Ethnocentric. Freaks out that he doesn't understand the language, and immediately moved into the strangeness effect. So this is what we hear, and people say this all the time. It's this: what is she saying about me?
Oh gosh.
It's the idea that they must be talking, they're speaking something I don't understand, so they must be talking about me. And it's a silly example, but you hear it all the time. Like, they must be talking something about me because I don't understand that.
You feel the threat of...
I feel the threat.
Right.
I feel the threat. And you watch all the social media videos right now of two cultures trying to talk. I'm talking about and let's talk about our country, white, black. You look at some of these, they're trying to have a conversation, and you hear words like, I feel threatened.
Yeah.
Where does that come from? I mean, obviously it can come from an actual physical threat, but most of the time, and the ones that we all love, the evil loving fascination of watching these ridiculous conversations is that, somebody feels threatened because they don't understand that person's cultural background. And so they're talking in a way that I'm not used to, so I feel threatened. It's an ugly thing.
Tell me the name of your studies.
Intercultural studies.
Intercultural studies. So I'm trying to think of concepts like a way to use this, because we talked about ethnocentrism is not a bad thing necessarily.
Right.
If it's unchecked, it could start to trickle into strangeness and threatened and fear and all those things.
Right.
I guess, how do we become, is it more than just bringing it up to become aware of when we're in our ethnocentric mode?
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like when we're in moments, they say we're traveling or say we are meeting a different family, here in San Diego, it's super, super multiculturally diverse.
Right.
When we go in our friend's house they're only speaking Tagalog, or, we go to our neighbor's house and we don't understand anything that anybody's saying in Spanish. What can help us know we're in an ethnocentric zone?
Right.
To not let it.
That's a really good question and a really good way of posting it or saying it. So the whole idea within interculturalism is the word that is used a lot is the word competence.
Okay.
It's a really important word because competence reminds me that nobody is born good at crossing cultures. We're born and we live within the norm of our life. It's just the way it is. There's nothing wrong with that. Most of us, our first interaction with people that are different than us is kindergarten or preschool. You know, all of a sudden now we're in a group, and you watch those kids. They have to learn to be competent in sharing, in waiting their turn. These are normal skills, and we have to continue that as an adult. So competence is a really important part of that. So competence begins with, I believe, and it begins where a lot of personal growth issues begin, self-awareness. Competence doesn't start with you have the skills to fix this. It starts with recognizing you don't know it all. It's that kind of like Socrates, you know, I know that I know more than you because I know that I know nothing. Like me knowing that I am now, so I'm in, you know, you're in your family, extended family's house and Tagalog is being spoken and you don't understand it, but the food is great, you know. Right. And so you're picking and choosing. I like this part of the culture. I have no idea what's happening. Your competence begins at saying, I'm in a unique situation. Rather than it letting me get scared right away.
Got it.
I start by saying, I am not the center. Or maybe there's even a better place. I recognize that I am my center and I want to not do that.
Got it.
And I think that's the beginning of breaking down that.
When you can just name the fact that you feel the differentness around you.
Exactly.
But not in a way that you become scared of it or
exactly.
you want to run from it.
And you might not know how to fix it. You might not know. I mean, listen, when it comes to language, you can't fix it. If you don't know Tagalog or Amharic or, you know, Spanish or whatever, Polish, you can't fix it. But by knowing, hey, I'm in a home where everybody here speaks Polish.
So let me ask you this then. Would you say, how extremely would you state the idea that working on your competency is not just, I guess, a useful life skill for yourself, but I guess how much emphasis would you put on cultivating this competency of intercultural,
like connections,
connection. You know, is it dangerous to be a person that never ever tries to check the sensation? Is it, you know, like, is that the road to automatically becoming somebody who's maybe going to be a discriminatory person or a racist potentially at some point? I guess tell me more about.
Well, I think that I think that the more we learned at becoming competent, again, it's like that book that I was mentioning, cultures don't meet, people do. So if your goal is to connect to people, then cultural competence should be very high on your list. And it's not like it has to be, I don't think it's about like, excluding everything else around you. It's simply about like, I'm going to learn from I'm in this moment where I don't know what's happening. I want to learn from this. Kind of like how an anthropologist would do that. Like, I want to learn from the interactions that are happening around me. I'm not just going to study it. I want to be a part of it. I want to be a friend with that person. If I'm going to do that, I'm going to have to become more competent in understanding what it is that separates us.
That's good.
I may not be able to learn all the language. I may not be able to learn all the cultural customs and all that, but I can learn enough to not, or to be able to bridge a gap. And I believe as Christians, our ultimate goal is to connect people to Jesus. It's not just evangelism, but even fellowship or like Christian camaraderie, a connection to another. I've benefited from going to churches where I don't speak any of the language, but I experience God. And I'm benefited by a competency that says my norm isn't the only way that God connects to people. So I go into Africa and he's connecting with people in ways totally different than here in San Diego. But it's not about right or wrong. It's how God's meeting people there. And when I do that, I'm benefiting. I'm growing. I'm learning. I also think, and then I'll finish the thought here, is that I think competence allows me to see that not everything is hunky-dory and great and good. The world is not just like a good place and everybody's good and all culture is good. It doesn't work like that. Competency allows me to understand that there is evil. There is wrong. Jesus didn't become one of us so that he could just say we're all doing really good. We're messed up. He came to fix what was broken. So I think there is a place of competency that allows me to see something might be broken in a culture, but if I don't know it, I might unintentionally praise something that is actually wrong. And then I'm doing a disservice.
That's good. I was asking that question because I'm wondering for somebody listening, and even myself, when I hear this term of ethnocentrism and developing a diversity competency, is it something that I cannot leave unexplored if I actually do want to be able to build a relationship with any person I might come across and be genuinely not just interested in them, but genuinely learn to love them despite the quote unquote strangeness that I may feel from our interaction. So
we all have
that's
to.
helpful.
We have to grow.
We have to confront this idea in all of ourselves to get to that place.
And these weren't things talked about 50, 60, 70 years ago very much because the world was separated. Internet, businesses are now, we say globalization. Now, in some of the books that I've read, it's funny, they used to have chapters on globalization. They've taken them out now because it's just a part of everything.
It's just here.
So we have to realize that the world has changed. We are mixing culturally on so many levels. That's levels.
Good.
So one final thought, and then I guess we gotta wrap this one up, and it's something that I wrote this down for a different conversation, but I want to mention it, and it'll come up in a lot of our other episodes. But it has to do with privilege. It's this: I lose nothing by honoring other people, and I think in privilege, and I want to wrap it up by privilege because I am sympathetic to people who are struggling with the concept. I am. Not because I think it's okay, but because these are we're not going to help people bridge those gaps if we just isolate them by telling them they're dumb or, you're a racist because you don't understand. It's just not going to bridge gaps. We've got to do our best. Some people will come, some people will not. That's the way it goes. But I lose nothing for honoring human beings.
Yeah, that's good, man. It's simple, but...
It's so simple. It's so simple. So, okay, we got to wrap it up. So, Our big words, it's like a Sesame Street, right?
Yep.
Ethnocentrism, strangeness, and power dynamics, which is what we call privilege. And remember that. I'm going to lose and you're going to lose nothing to honor people in our lives. So I'm really glad to have gotten to have this episode. Make sure you've subscribed to the podcast and share it with your friends. We hope that these are being useful for you. Looking forward to seeing you in the next episode.